There's some people in the gun community, in the gun rights movement, that believe if we're ever going to win the fight for our gun rights in this country, we're going to have to compromise with the people on the other side. The anti-gunners, the pro-gun control people. And you might think that I, as a Second Amendment absolutist, would have none of that I would not agree to that at all, that I wouldn't have anything I'm willing to compromise on. But you know what? You'd be wrong. Hey everybody, Yankee here. As a Second Amendment absolutist, and I think I've proven that for years, that I am an absolutist when it comes to the Second Amendment, you wouldn't think I'd have a lot of room to compromise, not a lot of wiggle room when it comes to gun rights in this country. And you're right, there's not a whole lot of room for me as far as compromise is concerned if I have to deal with the anti-gunners or the pro-gun control people. I think that any free adult citizens should have their Second Amendment rights and they should not be infringed on. I don't agree with background checks. I don't agree with felons being prohibited people. If someone has proven that they're too dangerous to be part of society and have their rights, well, then they've also proven that they should be locked up. And if you're not locked up, you should have all your rights. You know how I feel about that. I've gone over it ad nauseum in these videos. People know I am an absolutist when it comes to the Second Amendment. But I do think that a lot of people on the anti-gun or pro-gun control side are not zealots. They're not these crazy people that just want all of us disarmed. They want to take all guns away. I don't think that's most people. I think that's most politicians, because I think it's the 1% of Americans, the rich people that are in control, that have all the power and own the politicians. They all want us disarmed. And I think they manipulate a lot of people into thinking that's what they want too. But in reality, I think most people that want gun control really want kids to be safe, churches to be safe, places where people gather. They want to be able to go out and not have someone be shot. They don't want to have to hear about little kids being shot in the school, etc. They really have good intentions. They might just not understand the importance of the Second Amendment or of guns or anything like that, and they've been misled by the people in power. So I think if we actually talked directly to these people, they could be reasonable, the vast majority of them. And I think we could make some progress. And there are some things, like I said, I'd be willing to compromise on. Now, I wouldn't be able to compromise on most things, like anything that, like I said, infringed on any free adult citizen's rights. Not okay with that. But the key word there is adult. Because I think the best thing we could do in this country to make people safer when it comes to guns is educate people. And educating old people like me, that's not good. You don't do that, because my head's already full. If I learn something new, I forget something old. And I don't want to forget how to drive or something. I think that's why most old people forget how to drive. Because they learned something new because some snotty little millennial decided to teach them something and they forgot something important. So the best time to teach people is when they're kids. And like I said, even though I think most people's rights are uninfringible, I don't think that's a word, but you know what I'm saying, when you're an adult citizen in this country. When you're a kid, not so much. We make kids do all kinds of things that you should never be able to make an adult do. So I say educate them when they're young as far as firearms are concerned. And we would be doing a lot in this country, to make things safer. Mandatory training. Things that I'm not for when it comes to adults. I am not for anybody having to be trained to operate a gun. I don't think they're that difficult. But I think children should be trained. So I would be great with the idea, I'd be really happy with the idea of mandatory gun safety training for kids. Now, I'm not saying put live guns in the hands of young kids and just let them go crazy, or even live fire training for kids at a young age. In grade school, maybe just give them the basics, teach them safety. Maybe create some, like Lego versions of guns, like puzzles that you can take them apart and put them together that are like toys, so that they can learn the inner workings. Because a lot of the times when people have accidents with guns, it's because they didn't really understand how that gun works and how to treat it safely. So if we instilled that in them from a young age, they had made it fun putting them back together, like taking apart the toy AR-15 and putting it back together, seeing how fast you can do it, beat your friends, all kinds of stuff like that. I think that would be fun for them. I think they'd learn a lot. And then when they got into junior high, then you'd start doing some live fire stuff, learning basic, marksmanship and everything. And then when they're in high school, you could make it more advanced. They could even be clubs if they wanted to be, like competition teams, and still going over the basics of safety. When you should and shouldn't use a gun, how you should and shouldn't use a gun, and then they have to pass a basic course to graduate. I mean, we make them take PE, for God's sakes, to graduate. If you can make them do monkey bars, well, you can make them learn gun safety and marksmanship. And not just teach them those things. Teach them the things that also make it more likely that they won't abuse guns in their future. Teach them conflict resolution, starting at grade school. Teach them how to be magnanimous, how to deal with other opinions. Teach them how to have good interpersonal relationships with people. Once they get into high school, start saying, hey, eventually you're going to have boyfriends, girlfriends, wives, husbands. You're getting there, probably got boyfriends and girlfriends already, but eventually it's going to be more serious. You're going to be in a big, important relationship, like a marriage, a big contract. And you need to know how to deal with that. You need how to interact with each other. You need to know how to deal with conflicts when you have them. You need to learn how not to be codependent and all these other things. There's all kinds of things we could teach kids. I mean, we already teach psychology classes, so how much of a difference would it be to teach interpersonal psychology? Interpersonal, how to deal with each other. Skills. Teach all those. Teach, like I said, conflict resolution, how to deal with problems, how to accept things that you don't agree with, all that stuff. All of that would help make it much less likely that people ever misuse guns to begin with. And since they would be trained in the use of guns, trained in the safety, trained in the mechanics, they would have an understanding of it, there'd be a lot less issue with people having problems, especially accidents, negligent discharges later in life. If we did those things, it would really only be criminals using guns. Right now, one of the big problems we have is interpersonal relationships, people in marriages, etc., going off the deep end and killing each other because they don't know how to deal with emotions. They don't know how to deal with relationships. They get so entwined in each other, they think, well, if that person's not here, I might as well be dead. So if they're not going to be with me, I might as well make sure they're dead and I'm dead. If they had better skills, better coping skills, better mental coping skills, emotional coping skills, we wouldn't see as much of that. It would just be bad guys using guns. And we can deal with that. We put them in prison, and be prepared to deal with them if they come at us, because we're all good marksmen, well-trained. We know what we're doing. We got good heads on our shoulders. We take care of the bad guys. So I think that's one compromise we could make. Not taking away any rights of any adults, but starting at a young age, make our kids more capable. Not just with the mechanical side of firearms, the safety side of firearms, the importance of firearms in our society or in any free society, but also help them become emotionally stable enough to operate them properly and to own them without incident, and how to have relationships. We don't do any training for kids in how to deal with interpersonal relationships, how to deal with conflict, or any of that. And that money we're spending on, learning French for 3 years, or square dancing in PE class, all those things. We could easily be doing those things instead. Now, I'm not saying every kid would have to take it, because there's going to be like, but what about some kid who's in high school and he just is so anti-gun, he's, just doesn't believe in it. He's against his religion. He's a pacifist. Well, being a pacifist doesn't mean you're against guns, because you can understand that other people might feel the need to enact violence, and you might be able to realize sometimes violence is necessary. You're just not willing to do it. That doesn't mean you're necessarily against guns. But if it does, if it meant that, let's say your religion or whatever opposes it, well, we let people out of sex ed class if their religion opposes it. So I'm sure there would be exceptions for things like that. But still, we would end up with the major portion of our kids coming out of high school with all the tools they need to be safe, successful, prosperous gun owners. That they would know what they're doing, they would know how to do it, and they would have the emotional skills to make sure they don't misuse those guns. So those are compromises I'd be willing to make. And I think a lot of anti-gunners, pro-gun control people, if they could see that and say, hey, that would drastically cut down on gun violence. That would drastically cut down on accidents. That would drastically cut down on everything. Even suicides, if we enacted, like I said, that emotional mental health training, that conflict resolution, that, not being codependent, all these other things, and then dealt with other people that had mental illness also, if we put that in secondary to the schools, we could eliminate almost all gun violence except for hardcore criminals. And I think a lot of them would go for that. So I am willing to compromise some. I think that's a big compromise, and I think that would work. Hey everybody, Yankee here. Before we go, I just want to take a second to remind everyone that this channel is 100% viewer funded. We don't take a penny from advertisers, retailers. We don't take money from political organizations. There's no one telling me what I need to tell you. Everything that we do is done through the generosity of our viewers, either buying merchandise or becoming a patron or a Subscribe Star member. You're all the ones that support Pets and Vets and TYMP. And that's the reason I can stay true to myself and loyal only to the people who watch my channel. And I can spend my time talking about what I want to talk about, telling what I think needs to be said, and giving you my uncensored take on things I think you need to hear. So if you'd like to help keep things that way, please support the channel by becoming a patron, a Subscribe Star supporter, or just going over to my web store and buying some merch. The links are all in the upper corner of this video.